Okay, if you'll pardon me for a while, people, I'm going to indulge in some astrophysics, which I do believe I created. Thank you. Chapter 1, Pertinent Mindless Banter, Exclusions and the Hypotheses. Imagine time, space, and a definitive reluctance to recognize the obvious, or obviously overlooked. A precursor to nothing or everything, and shown in correlation beyond all our gifted reasoning. God organizes perfect destructive and procreative forces, guises and patterns set forth and protected by these. Forces which are these in many cases. Inconquerable, though, at times, benign at others, manifesting violently. Just adding justice to a somber, sobering truth. The universe, what is it, and what does it pertain to? The only answers lie in and of itself, containing oftentimes infinite patterns, illustrated with the most deafening poignancy beyond the all too often overlooked disclosures. Betrayed by a combustion I cannot discern, nor do I care to, imploding or exploding over billions of years, however not too random, given their significant portions to be recorded. I'm only starting to write about such infinite patterns at this point in the book. In this chapter, I would rather expand upon my rhythmic theory in terms easier to understand. Throw a rock into a lake that is calm and ripples develop. These too have a pattern, although only temporary. My intention in this chapter is to write of temporal issues, though as I believe the existence of physics as well as God is very obvious. It at times implements, in quotes, ideal physics, which are capitalized, by the way, and at others delves both me and the reader into a theological state of mind. The other day, as I returned home as it was currently fall, with a blind eye, I noticed the leaves on the trees that had partially turned brown but were still in part green. Who would mistake that for rhythm? In nature there are rhythmic patterns, as goes evolution, or should I say creationism, as not to confuse the reader or contradict so it would seem myself. For now, let's just assume whenever I say evolution, I mean creationism. I believe that God's approximate rhythmic patterns explained through my limited rationale should begin with this. Though perhaps it's part of evolution, moment after moment, and season upon season, year after year, there is a rhythm to our world, and to our universe, and to our universe, or universes. This rhythm establishes a pattern over time. Whenever anything does not fall into this pattern, nature or the universe or universes notices a break in the rhythm or rhythms, and either destroys that which causes the break or adapts to or around it, assuming of course it does not make that which it did not destroy adapt. A good example of this would be cavefish, who currently do not have eyes because they do not need them. Now for more temporal issues, I would like at this point to discuss alpha rhythms, or alpha waves as they're sometimes called, but do not currently have the information needed to further elaborate on my point. The adaptation of the universe and the earth is perhaps what makes nature and the universe strong. I know in one last statement I made them sound like a single issue, when it and the factor are two separate issues for the most part. I couldn't show my hypotheses without showing some exceptions to the rule, this being part of evolution. Not that I read about an evolution, but at least as I see it. Now as I'm trying to make this viable, excuse me, I had a problem with my throat. Now as I'm trying to make this viable, illuminated distribution of universal changeable energy as an exemplified instrument, in approximate universal rhythms, I shall further be concerned with what falls outside of these approximate universal rhythms, which ultimately sometimes establish patterns. with all being part of the intrinsically rhythmic universe or universes. Take your choice. Which this chapter probably should be titled. In nature, as well as the universe, there is an exception to every rule. This would not only be an example of this, but perhaps the rule exists because of this. I believe that one of these hypotheses can be taken all the way from the birth and death of stars into the temporal quantum, which I state because the birth and death of stars involves fission and fusion, and probably nuclear and subnuclear actions, or quantum physics. Okay, now for the hypotheses. Excuse me. Illuminated distribution of universal changeable energy as an exemplified instrument in approximate universal rhythms. 1. The dying of light, such as through a black hole as gravity foils light, or it is foiled in some other manner, and rebirth of light within the same section of the universe, or a universe, we believe has an approximate rhythm, which would prove as everything is in a constant state of flux, in parentheses, Plato. There are no absolutes except God, but approximate rhythms throughout the universe, delving into and controlling nature completely as God's rhythmic systems. I'm using the time which it takes for light to be disposed of and reborn as a basis to prove that the entire universe uses systems that are correlated through rhythmic patterns. 2. Based upon the same given evidence, if the first hypothesis can be proven a theory, then so can this. God created the universe to exist in sections. Could be proven in an astronomy observatory, I would guess, which records the death and birth of stars. Excuse me, my mouth is incredibly dry. Which records the birth and death, or death and birth of stars, would have to send their findings of at least the past 20 years to a mathematician who would then have to do a series of equations with variations. Currently, these are just hypotheses. Chapter 2. Exceptions inside of a truth. Now, for you of lesser and greater understanding, in theory, whether or not precluded by a mishap, or the natural order of things. In our ever-growing universe, the many, always as in all things, outweigh the one. In simpler terms, if a star or a series of stars fall outside of this approximate rhythmic pattern, it does not make it more or any less true, as the universe is truly unpredictable, even to the greatest minds. Let's explain with wooden matches. Match A burns throughout to the point of the person holding it having to drop it, while match B burns only just throughout the wick. Match C on a windy day, not of an ideal test group, goes out just past the halfway point of the match on its own, so it would seem. Neither is the universe a fixed or controlled group, but one ever-changing, but a series of variables, which I am going to prove, as in almost all things, has an approximate rhythmic pattern. As I've already illustrated, there are some exceptions to the rule when just dealing with temporal issues, provided then I would assume that they also exist in space, or the cosmos. We need to secure every area of such a hypothesis or hypotheses for a theory to be well-founded. I would be all the more elated without any preclusions, I must admit, however. In the simplest of terms, match C is unpredictable on such a windy day in regards to its fire, and likewise, furthermore, if we brought match A out into the wind and were able to relight it, it too might then burn out. And how many stars go supernova in clusters, destroying if not swallowing up those around them? Chapter 3. The procreations of stars and things that we do not understand. Inside of every process, every system that has a process, there is a product, in parentheses, mathematically, of time. Prevalent in and precarious to my writing herein is a star born every 5 seconds, every 15 seconds, and likewise further dying. Those are with question marks, by the way. It is impossible to know. So let's stay within my hypotheses. Even then, given a possible preclusion, it would be very hard to prove. Such writing is already listed herein. Even in a fixed or given section of the universe, it seems to me that although not too often, stars can and must fall outside of an approximate rhythmic pattern. We shall refer to these abnormal stars, which are so due to time, as anomalies. This deviation of time by a very few could throw my entire hypotheses into chaos if not forewarned both to and by the reader. But as I already stated in the previous chapter, the many in our ever-growing universe always outweigh the one. However, the hypotheses still stand, and make notice I have emphasized such preclusions as to take the proper measures to make the reader and everyone involved in proving this understand. How do we know when it is day, and how likewise do we know when it is night? As the Earth rotates on its axis, daylight can be seen, and then later, as it completes half a revolution, night. This, although easy to understand, and thereby far from the principle of the chapter title, is more proof of approximate rhythmic patterns. Although slightly overstated because the Earth keeps a tight rhythmic pattern in time, it should do the trick to further elaborate on my point. Chapter 4, The Weight of the Many. Now imagine rain falling from the sky. In further detail, let's approximate 150 raindrops. Out of these 150, or every 150, 1 or 2 is slightly acidic. Would we then call that acid rain? No, but rather 1 or 2 drops that fall outside of the rain's purity. Likewise, my random preclusions or anomalies don't disprove the hypotheses. They are according to a masterful logic, seemingly non-existent in reference to the hypotheses and the rain. To reiterate one last time, as in all things, the many always outweigh the one. So at this point, let's omit them from the hypotheses due to their irrelevance. Okay, a new part of this is called, probably what the book will actually be called, Time, Space, Fabric, and then in quotation marks, Rhythmic Values and a question mark. Chapter 5, Narrowing the Bridge to Create a Path. Am I doing good? Cool. Is there any way to pause this? Okay. I believe that a possible link between general relativity and quantum mechanics lies in approximate universal rhythms, as I believe that there is a possible rhythmic pattern to both, which I believe can be illustrated through illuminated distribution of universal changeable energy as an exemplified instrument in approximate universal rhythms. Is this a link to the base of the tree of physics? I honestly at this point can only speculate, as I am of somewhat limited knowledge, through the hypotheses. If illuminated distribution of universal changeable energy as an exemplified instrument in approximate universal rhythms is a link between general relativity and quantum mechanics, then the answer must lie in the death of stars, as it seems impossible to measure, and ascribing a rhythmic value that has nothing to do with music to the pulse photons, in parentheses, gamma rays to be specific, usually at least, created through their demise from a great distance. I believe, if at all possible, that will show a rhythmic pattern to both quantum physics and general relativity. At this point, we should see more clearly the base of the tree of physics and possible unification. Perhaps that can be done by sending a, in parentheses, microwave, with the question mark in the parentheses, pulse, wave or series thereof, in and retrieving it or them, much as was done on much as was done on an extremely smaller scale with sonar in the ocean. That should give us a more accurate representation of the star's destructive pulses, in parentheses, gamma rays, comma, photons, comma, etc. Rhythmic values, comma, not discounting other hypotheses or theories, of course. This is not only my attempt to distance myself from other similar hypotheses and comment on them, but to further elaborate on mine in accordance where I was heading originally, comma. The only difference is now with further education I feel it necessary to establish my entire views, not based upon anything which I have read, but quite the opposite. The problems physicists have been having with recording photons, which include gamma rays, and to be more specific, as to make this a matter of entire entry into what I am saying, gamma rays. Is there waiting? Sorry, it sounds like I said the same thing twice. I got ahead of myself. Gamma rays. That's what I meant. Is there waiting with a satellite or satellites to record them? They need to have those satellites send out a pulse, microwaves in parentheses with a question mark, and ascribe a rhythmic value to the gamma rays and, in parentheses, photons and gamma rays and photons of other sorts, as not to exclude anything. And that's the end of the parentheses. After retrieving the pulse, as was done, as I have already stated, with sonar on a much smaller scale in the ocean, any anomalies or preclusions by gamma rays or photons in general that fall outside of these well-founded, accepted, given set of value system need discounted as such with regards to what I have already stated in an earlier chapter. Only then will general relativity and quantum mechanics be unified according to our understanding. Sometimes it's not enough to simply gather information. One needs to be able to analyze it properly! Exclamation point. Microwave pulses, perhaps low level, generated unto a precise distance of travel, should upon retrieval help one gather information that they can more effectively utilize. Now to elaborate. The reason that I believe that almost, if not all photons, including gamma rays in particular, have been moving at much different speeds during the same period, or so it would seem, is the universe, or universes perhaps, are changing far more rapidly than assumed, and as such, although it doesn't seem so, they at times are coming from different places over a very vast amount of space and time. The universe, or universes, is or are growing not because they lie dormant, but is ever changing and are ever changing, and as such, say for example, although perhaps longer, comma, within every 150 million light years, the volatile universe or universes could have, say, 5 supernovas, and due to their speeds according to the distance and speed of the photons, in parentheses gamma rays especially, low level and high level, and subsequently different distances and speeds of seemingly different photons, and especially gamma rays, would reach the satellites simultaneously. Chapter 6. Gamma ray and photon flux between pardoned, and in parentheses what I mean by pardoned, excused, low level or high level microwaves. First off, if you adhere to popular belief, you're wrong! Exclamation point. Everything proven can be disproved! Exclamation point. Even if by a well-educated half-wit who is wrong! Exclamation point. Fill your head with knowledge, and with an exceedingly high ability to reason and aptitude, make your own determinations! Exclamation point. In essence, I, with my limited rationale, am going to explain the law, in quotation marks, rhythmic values, in much further detail. You'll then, upon hearing about or reading, make your own assessment according to your, comma, or your level, comma, of understanding! Exclamation point. We're at first noticed to use high or low level microwaves to ascribe a pulse with rhythmic patterns upon retrieval over time. At first glance, as to assess, gauge, etc., the value of the rhythmic pulse, I would expect is impossible due to opposing force caused by the microwaves of low level exerted on the gamma rays, although the change might be only slight. In further detail, there might be no change at all due to the gamma rays altercation with, in parentheses, low or high level microwaves, end parentheses. As I or we explain this first in the future and in future reference, used in such a way, the microwaves, in quotes, in quotation marks, starting parentheses, whether low or high, as of yet has not been determined. Once both are tried, it should be an easy extrapolation as of what to use in future elaborations. End of parentheses. Are in this work to be called micron pulses, which are in quotation marks. This, applied correctly, will not only ascribe through the retrieval of the low or high level microwaves, micron pulses in parentheses, a rhythmic value best, it should also work as a tool to differentiate between the time that they're coming in or rate at which they're receiving photons of high energy, and especially gamma rays, comma, which means that over time we should be able to distinguish, comma, one high level photon, comma, or gamma rays, comma, exciting that over time different ones can be shown exactly to come from a specifically different location, comma, without respect, comma, or leading to those specific locations. In other words, we'll be able to isolate photons, especially gamma rays, or differentiate between them. Chapter 7, Beyond Borders. In the past, I spoke of many things, comma, illuminated distribution of universal changeable energy, as an exemplified instrument in approximate universal rhythms, comma, rhythmic values, comma, and ever-growing universes, comma. Now, however, I'm going in further elaboration, tell you when the microwaves, which loosely speaking, frequencies, in quotation marks, are received, computers can capture them on the satellites, and thereby, through many such micron pulses, establish a pattern mathematically between individual high-level photons, including gamma rays, comma. Through such a process, comma, then they can be ascribed a rhythmic pattern, and thereby distinguishing each of the gamma rays and all high-level photons from the others. If they're not received within certain probably established borders of time, simply do not count the pulses to the value system, as they obviously were not received, comma, rhythmic values, comma, so it began, comma, so it is finished. Please shut that off.